My disclosure is that I've been paid by the federal government for 37 years, and that probably biases my perspective. So I'll just say that this is the NIH, and the mission of NIH, which is to seek fundamental knowledge about the nature and behavior of living systems and the application of that knowledge to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce the burden of illness and disability. It's a pretty ambitious and great mission, and Francis Collins is emphasizing that it encompasses both basic research, fundamental research, and applied research. We have been using the number of Nobel laureates supported by NIH for a while because it's a system not run by the United States or NIH. As you can see from the last sweep that we had in 2013, it's been pretty much populated by senior white males, but at the same time, the dominance, about 80% of awardees since World War II have been supported by NIH. It's shown the overall dominance of the system established by NIH, which has as its foundation peer review. This is that's the history, and I don't want to emphasize other measures, but this is the other overwhelming fact of life. This goes back to 1978. In 1979, we briefly hit 40% success rates. It's been going up and down. Before 2003, it averaged over 30%, and since 2003, it's hit historic lows. It's now in the teens, and because in 2015, there was a 14% increase in applications, that will take another sharp drop, and to probably close to 15%. As many of you know, success rate overestimates the actual probability of any given application receiving an award, which is substantially less than 15%. The average rate of awards for first-time applications, this is not just first-time awardees, but just that initial type 1 application is around 6%. So I just wanted to mention quickly why NIH has been so successful. How do I go back? I hope it's back. No. A few factors in, thank you. NIH's success is to focus funding on ideas and not on institutions. That ideas spring from local investigators, that researchers, I need to actually read this a bit, compete like entrepreneurs, and I know that there's been at least one paper that criticized this idea for funding. That scientific experts do judging. It's less about peers and more about expertise. That institutions receive funds only when their scientists succeed in the process. That NIH program and review are split, and I'm going to discuss that a little bit more in a moment. Scientists, scientists manage the peer review process, and finally, power is divided. So NIH has a particularly divided power process, so no one can screw it up completely by themselves. There are 24 institutes and centers that do funding at the NIH. That's one of the important ways in which power is divided. And NIH review is the basis for a constant process of renewal. One of the features of, I think, the peer review process is that scientists undergo periodic evaluations. And only if they can pass that process do they continue to get funding. This has served as an important way of renewing overall science, a characteristic of many institutions that have started out spectacularly well and often had a strong period of vigorous output, is that it's one thing to identify a great scientist or a great lab. It's another thing to keep it going beyond a generation. And that's one thing that NIH has been able to achieve. Since World War II, we've gone through approximately 3 generations of science. An important characteristic of that is it's not just about peer review. We have a 2-stage process in which the first level of review is a peer review process. Most of it examined within the Center for Scientific Review, but about 30% of applications are reviewed within the institutes. So this is a study section process of expert review. But after that, for the award itself, it goes to another set of individuals called program staff at NIH within the institutes. And they make a decision based on relevance to institute missions on whether or not a scientist who has been vetted for their science should get money because they will contribute to the missions of the various institutes. Currently, the vast majority of award is based on the scientific merit score, but the institutes go out of order in funding between 11% of the time and 30% of the time. So there's a substantial amount of review by program staff. Core values of peer review are expert assessment, transparency, impartiality, fairness, confidentiality, integrity, and ethical conduct. These each could use a whole lecture of discussion by themselves. Maintaining a culture in which this can be kept within peer review is extremely important. Many countries who come to try and understand why NIH peer review has worked so well have a hard time incorporating all of these issues, and we're having a struggle ourselves in maintaining this in the face of tremendous competition that's going on with current funding rates. So overall goals for CSR are to do the highest quality review. I'll let you just read that. Conduct peer review as efficiently as possible. We're always asked to try and conserve resources so that most of the resources can go to the research itself. Peer review is currently costing about 1% of the costs of the grants that are spent by NIH. Perform controlled experiments in peer review. So I agreed to take on this job if CSR would be given a separate budget which would allow it to do controlled experiments, and I'm going to mention a few of those right now, but it's research to improve the quality and efficiency of peer review is part of our goal. So what about quality in peer review? Recently in Science, Danielle Lee and her co-author published a paper, Big Names and Big Ideas. The peer review panels select the best science proposals. This came after a number of studies within individual institutes had said there was no correlation between either citations, publications, or patents with scoring in peer review, and we were interested in probing that. by doing a longer term study of all the awards generated by NIH, it was clear that there was an overall relationship, and they showed the statistics of that relationship. It is very noisy, but there is a relationship between scores and citations, publications, and patents. Interestingly, when this was dug into, there was even more of a relationship in the highest score level, so that in the 0 to 10% range, there was a very unexpectedly high relationship that went beyond that, a relationship that could be predicted by past citations and past publications, which was important to us. And finally, I published with a co-author a paper showing that program staff is actively intervening at low score levels or poor score levels, and that intervention also means that what peer review indicated was meritorious and what was actually paid were different. There were different applications. So program staff manipulates applications to fund only the most meritorious parts of poorly scoring applications. And finally, right now we are attempting to do studies that are looking at different scoring systems, alternative formats of review, anonymizing review, and to do reliability studies of review. All of these things obviously could take several slides to describe in themselves, so I won't try and do that. But we think our proposals are that, one, we need to restore some growth to science funding. This is a particularly propitious time for all of our organizations to decry the current situation for science funding, because it looks like there may be growth again. We need to test ideas for change. I get, Mike Lauer and Sally Rocky get, and NIH gets more generally, ideas for change in peer review, several times a week between us. Most of those ideas have no support behind them. That is, no preliminary data, no studies. And many studies that we in fact implement, many changes we in fact implement have no data behind them. Finally, we should use citations as a threshold, not as a measure. I think it's good to say that citations should come out of science, but the fact that someone has less than 1,000 citations shouldn't be held against them. I think we've gone overboard. When we look at organizations that are really stellar in terms of their science, they do peer review, they don't do citation measures. And I think we've seen enough countries where citation worship has completely corrupted science. So those are our three proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much.